Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm bringing you a tag video and it's one I have created. It is the horror booktube tag and I have been wanting to do this for quite a while now. I realised there weren't any specifically horror related book tags out there. There seem to be a few more like spooky and Halloween-y type ones, but nothing that was really like horror. So I figured I would try my hand at it and this is what I came up with. So I have 13 questions because of course there have to be 13, and I just thought this would be a fun way for horror booktubers to talk a little bit about what they like about horror, how they got into the genre, throw out some recommendations, and also hopefully it might be a way for us to find other horror booktubers and new booktubers that are into horror. It might be a good way for us to all find each other. So if you're a booktuber and you're into horror, whether that be all horror all the time or you just like to dip in and out of the genre from time to time, I would love to hear your answers to this tag. Question 1. How and when did you get into horror? I got into horror when I was quite young. My best friend at primary school, Hannah, her parents were much more lenient than mine, so she was allowed to watch horror films and other stuff that I was not allowed to. So I definitely got a little bit of a taste of a few things when I was over at her house from time to time, and other times she would just explain plots of horror films that she'd seen to me and I would have to live vicariously through her descriptions. And then when I was about 10 or 11, the Point Horror book series came out in the UK, and this was just everything to me because they had the same kind of covers as the VHS horror tapes that I would see for rental but wasn't able to rent. But these were books that were actually written for kids like me, so I could totally go and spend my pocket money on one of these books, go home and read it, and that was totally allowed. So this was amazing to me and I became obsessed with this book series, and I still am today, if you couldn't tell. And as I got a bit older and into my teens, I was finally able to start persuading my parents to rent some horror films for me for sleepovers and stuff, and then I would just basically tape off TV any late night horror showing on like the 4 channels that we had and then watch them when I got home from school the next day. So that was basically my teenage years. And I continued to read horror as well as watch it. I read Dracula, I got really into vampires, and I read some Poppy Z. Brite. I moved on from the Point Horror stuff and read some Stephen King and James Herbert. Over the years, my reading tastes have gone to different places, but I have always continued to watch horror films and love them. And in more recent years, I've come back to reading horror again. So basically, I took like 2 steps back into the genre and found it was a very slippery slope, and before I knew it I was fully back into the horror genre and loving every minute. That was kind of long-winded, but hopefully that will give you a bit of an idea of where I'm coming from. Question 2. What was the first horror book that you read? And mine, at least the earliest one that I still have hold of, is the Bumper Book of Ghost Stories, edited by Mary Danby. And this was one I got from a school book fair. Anyone remember those? They were amazing. And yeah, this is just a collection of ghost stories for kids. And I love this cover, so yeah, my love for horror covers started at a pretty early age and not much has changed there. Question 3. What horror-related goodness can we expect from your channel? My particular interest is in vintage horror from the 1970s, 80s and 90s. If you've read Paperbacks from Hell, then that will give you an idea of what I'm into. I honestly don't really keep up with new releases. That's not to say that there aren't good ones out there, and there are always going to be the occasional ones that I'm really interested to pick up, but my heart lies with older titles and I love finding hidden gems. And videos wise, I really enjoy doing monthly reading wrap-ups, separate review videos for books that I particularly enjoyed and want to shout out a bit more. Also, I typically do a monthly book haul, and yeah, Usually just the general booktube videos, like the occasional tag and stuff like that. I also have a series on my channel called Nightmare Queens, where I talk about vintage horror written by women. So I have a handful of videos up for that if you want to go check them out. And yeah, I look forward to doing more videos in that series. I also did a series about my point horror book collection, which I had a lot of fun making. So yeah, there's a whole playlist of those videos if you want to check them out. Question 4. Do you have any favourite themes or subgenres within horror? And I don't think there's a particular subgenre that I gravitate towards or one that I don't gravitate towards. I kind of just read whatever takes my fancy. One thing I did notice looking at some of my favourite horror novels is that I really enjoy quieter, slower paced stories. So yeah, slow burn stuff is totally my thing. Number 5, name an underrated horror novel or author. I have 2 words for you. Bernhard Taylor. I fell in love with this author last year when I read Sweetheart, Sweetheart. This was a 5-star read for me. It's a really great ghost story with a twist. And since then I have also read The Godsend and The Reaping, both of which were excellent reads. He is a British horror author and I really fell in love with his style. He is definitely a good example of quiet, slow burn horror, and his writing is really intelligent. I thoroughly enjoyed these 3 and I am looking forward to reading more. I think he is a criminally underrated author because I don't hear him talked about nearly enough. So on the flip side, number 6, name an overrated horror novel or author. And for this I'm going to mention Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This is the only book of his I've read so far and I wasn't a big fan. I know this is much loved by many people, so I realise I'm in the minority, but I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't find it very interesting. I wasn't blown away by his writing style. It was just pretty underwhelming for the most part, especially considering it was such a long book that I kept at, hoping it would get better. So unfortunately Nosferatu wasn't for me. I do have Heart-Shaped Box by him on my shelf, which I'd like to get to one day and give him another chance, so we'll see. Number 7, recommend 3 of your favourite horror novels. One of them is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is such an incredible read. Her writing is fantastic. It's told from the perspective of 18-year-old Mary Cat, and she lives a pretty reclusive life with her sister and uncle. There is conflict between them and the other villagers, and yeah, I think this is a book worth going into, not knowing too much more than that. Another favourite is The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. This is a haunted house story with a difference, so if you're not typically a fan of haunted house stories, then I would still recommend giving this one a go. It's about a couple who live in a really nice house in a really nice neighbourhood, and a new house is built on this awkward lot of land next door, and bad things happen, to put it lightly. This is a really complex and layered story with a fantastic ending. And another favourite is definitely The Cipher by Kathy Koja. This is a unique read. Her writing is maybe a bit more divisive. You're probably going to love it or hate it. This is a grimy 90s story set in an apartment building, and 2 people who find a hole in the floor and they start to experiment with it and obsession takes over. This is such a phenomenal read. I loved it, and this edition is out of print, but you can get it on Kindle, and it is actually being reprinted. I believe it's next year, so that's really exciting and I hope more people get a chance to read it. Number 8, recommend a book for someone who is new to the horror genre. I would suggest The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. This is more of a classic ghost story, and it's about a solicitor who travels to the coast on the east of England to settle the affairs of a lady who has died. And it's super creepy and atmospheric, and yeah, just such a brilliant story. And I think this would be good for people new to the genre because it's more about atmosphere and it's just a really well written story. There's no crazy blood or gore in there, so hopefully it would appeal to more readers. Number 9, are there any book to film adaptations that you particularly loved or hated? I think Let the Right One In by John Avida Lindquist is both an amazing book and amazing film. Highly recommend that. It's a vampire story. And also The Omen, which the film and the book came out around the same time. The book was written by David Seltzer, who wrote the screenplay. So I think technically it's more of a novelisation of the film, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Both book and film are excellent. Same with Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco, and also Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Yeah, all wonderful books and films. And I can't think of an adaptation that I hated, although I'm sure I'm maybe just blocking it out of my memory. But I will mention a film adaptation that I think was better than the book, and that is Carrie, written by Stephen King. I thought the book was good, but I think the film is fantastic. So yeah, I don't know if that's a popular or unpopular opinion. You'll have to let me know your thoughts. Question 10. How do you discover new or new to you horror books? Like I said, I don't really keep up with new releases, but I do see them talked about a lot, especially on Instagram or Bookstagram, and I find a lot of my books physically in the wild, like secondhand places, thrift stores, library book sales and secondhand bookshops. So I'll either see ones that I've seen before online and have been interested in. Sometimes it'll be one that I've never heard of before, but it just looks interesting. So yeah, a lot of mine is trial and error and being sucked into awesome cover art, which sometimes works out and sometimes doesn't, but I can't resist it either way. And I also find Goodreads quite helpful if you're looking at the page for a book you enjoyed and it comes up with recommendations. I've found some interesting books that way. And of course, other horror booktubers. I love watching their reviews and wrap-ups and seeing what they've been reading and what they thought. So yeah, there are definitely many avenues to find new or new to me books. Question 11. What was the last horror book that you bought? Mine is Celia by Ruby Jean Jensen. This is one that I've been on the hunt for quite a while, so I was really pleased to find a copy on eBay recently for an affordable price, because this one gets listed for a lot of money. So I was really pleased to have this. I'm excited to read some more Ruby Jean Jensen, and this is one in particular that I really wanted to read, so pretty excited to have a copy in my hands now. Question 12. What horror book is at the top of your wish list? Mine has to be Black Ambrosia by Elizabeth Engstrom. This is a vampire novel from the 1980s, and it has been eluding me for some time now. There just don't even seem to be any copies available for sale. It is out of print, of course, so yeah, copies are hard to come by, but usually the case is there are copies out there, but the prices are ridiculous. But in this case, every time I look, there just aren't even any copies available. So I'm going to keep looking and keep my fingers crossed, because I read When Darkness Loves Us by her, and the first story in particular was amazing, and I've been wanting to read more of her work ever since. And I know Valancourt Books recently reissued this in their Paperbacks from Hell series, so that's awesome. But yeah, I really want to get my hands on more of her work, and Black Ambrosia sounds brilliant, but of course that's the one that I just can't seem to track down. So maybe one day. And number 13 is optional, but if you would like to tag some people, then go for it. And I have a lot of awesome horror booktubers that I want to mention here, but seeing as we are a fairly small community, if I mention everyone it kind of defeats the object of a tag video, so I figured I would just mention a few people. So I tag Stephanie at That's What She Read, Rachel at The Shades of Orange, Cameron Cheney, Cammy at Cammy's Corner, and Stacey at Stacey's Stories. And if anyone else would like to do this tag, then go for it. Don't feel you have to be specifically tagged to do so. I would love to hear anyone and everyone's answers to these questions, and if you do this tag, please let me know. I would love to check out your video. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!